Some people consider a comic book a whole genre, but it's not. Comics is a medium for storytelling, just like writing or filmmaking. Within the medium of comics, we can tell all kinds of stories in all kinds of genres. If we take a really broad overview of genre, you can put comics in two different categories: beginner readers and experienced readers. Beginner comics often means kid-friendly. It's comics that use elements of the panel to follow a young or naive protagonist's point of view. They explore familiar themes of personal identity, friendship, close family, courage, crushes, and growing pains. Beginner comics use an action-based approach to panel transitions, keeping the characters and conversations easy to follow, the passage of time clear and linear, and character development external. Experienced readers need more from their comics. In this case, the elements of the panel are used to follow mature, often older protagonists. Characters with much more baggage and more complex sense of identities. Themes could include power and corruption, prejudice, cultural dynamics, romance, and technology. A book designed for an experienced reader can utilize the nuances of symbolic and aspect-to-aspect transitions. These things engage with an experienced reader at a deeper and more satisfying level than a beginner comic. Within distinctions of point of view and thematic content, we could break down genre into a million more categories, but let's go with 7 for now. Gag comic, manga comic, comic adaptation, memoir comic, superhero comic, the period piece, and dramatic fiction. I picked these specific terms to discuss narrative forms that have emerged from the work of history's best comic artists. Genres such as gag comic and manga comics are unique to the art form of comics. But other terms like memoir and period piece have already been well established through literary traditions, but they've been enhanced by the inclusion of comics in their genre. The short form gag comic is inherent to comic arts. If you grew up in America, you probably read some Garfield or Peanuts comics as a kid. They are very popular and easy to follow. One of the legendary gag comics from the 1930s, Nancy, created by Ernie Bushmiller, was recently taken over by a young cartoonist named Olivia James. Nancy has always been a formulaic, though often brilliant, comic strip about silly ironies and odd encounters. Miss James has turned that eternally 8-year-old Nancy into a reflection of modern existence. The gag strip is the shortest form of comic narrative, so let's stretch it out more to graphic novel length. The industry of Japanese manga is vast and varied. It explores every possible nook and cranny of genre. For the sake of discussion, let's narrow the genre down to the way a lot of people are introduced to it, as long-form fantasy adventure stories about young heroes. And one of the most popular mangas is Dragon Ball, a serialized story by Akira Toriyama. The original series ran from 1984 to 1985. It blends supernatural action with martial arts, and we follow a main character named Son Goku. Son is on a search for the 7 legendary and wish-granting Dragon Balls. The franchise of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, the follow-up, is epic, and it spans over 40 volumes at this point, with all kinds of offshoots to bring in new generations of fans. The industry of manga focuses on young readers and gives them a first deep dive into character arcs that are driven by rich world building. You probably know a 12-year-old or two who are fanatic about manga, and with good reason. It's about kids. Kids living independently with awesome, unstoppable powers. The world building of Dragon Ball is dense, and the danger is real at least real for a cartoon world. And it's very in your face. Emotions run high. And the stakes often feel life-threatening. Manga can seem cartoonish and silly at times, but it covers so many base narratives that we engage with as kids. And unlike some forms of kid entertainment, manga doesn't talk down to its audience. Superhero stories are a pretty big deal these days in all forms of entertainment. And the dominant vision of what a superhero story is, and the characters that occupy that world, began with a comic artist named Jack Kirby, who started working in the mid-1930s. His visual style is super distinct. It can be recognized by the clean, chiseled look of the male hero's face, the simple yet distinguishable designs of iconic character costumes, and his amazing use of black shadow to guide the eye around his busy and energetic panels. Mr. Kirby's narrative style is fast-paced. He does a lot of action-to-action transitions, with characters that display amazing abilities of power and strength, not dissimilar from manga. And so many aspects of the superhero genre come from Mr. Kirby's work. He started in the 30s, but through the 60s and 70s, his stories expanded beyond the boundaries of places like Earth. His stories took on epic and intergalactic scales. And with those narratives came the need for new aspects of inking style in comics. Alien environments and exotic energy bursts needed their own distinct visual style. Superhero comics move quick. They cover vast gaps in time and space without blinking an eye. And that format and pace is something readers have come to expect. They're stories with lots of character history, and they can't afford to leave things ambiguous for fear of losing their readership. Like it or not, you get a lot of clunky thought bubbles and exposition that can slow the narrative down, but also make things very clear. Now let's look at literary adaptations in comics. When it comes to comics that adapt a classic novel, the best ones are always done out of love for the source material. And that's definitely the case with Hope Larson's adaptation of A Wrinkle in Time from 2012. Personally, I've been a longtime fan of Miss Larson's work. I've known her stuff from back when she did her own little short independent comics. She's always retained this sense of tranquility in her fluid, brushy ink work. And I love her use of heavy, dark spaces. It's really the perfect fit for the tone and world building of A Wrinkle in Time. This is a story about kids who travel through time and space to find their scientist father. It's a fantasy story, but it's also a story dependent on some tricky mathematical themes. The clean graphical style of Miss Larson's ink work brings clarity to some of these mind-boggling ideas, such as two-dimensional planets. You know, it wouldn't surprise me if middle school classrooms have started using the graphic novel in place of the original text. It's more engaging for students at all reading levels, which brings about more discussion and probably a pursuit of the original source material. It's a win-win for everybody. Go comics. All right, so let's catch our breath for a second before we jump into the next chapter.